Aruna, Ravichandran, it is wonderful to be here with you today. And I still say that because we're obviously not together in person, but we have a fantastic conversation and discussion lined up. And I know that this is a huge opportunity for our audience to hear from you as the CMO of Webex by Cisco as to what has been an incredible last year, and to again learn and be inspired from the work that you've been doing with your team, and the latest updates from, of course, from Webex as well. But before we get there, I always think it's quite helpful to start almost at the beginning and to get a sense of your professional journey and how you got to be the CMO of Webex. Because it's not a traditional CMO journey, and that's why I think this is particularly exciting. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, again, your current role and sort of the way that you have evolved into this position, and then we will continue into all the great areas of conversation. So Aruna, over to you.
Awesome. First and foremost, thank you for having me today. Very excited to join this conversation. So I have been in the technology space for a little over, God, it makes me feel old, 25 plus years right now. And I've had the opportunity to basically be on the two sides of the business. So I started my career as an engineer and spent about a decade in various different engineering roles. And after that, I moved on to what I lovingly call the darker side of the business, into a marketing profession and a career. And after I moved there, basically, that's been my home. And so because I have a good background in terms of both engineering and marketing, it's pretty much helped me a lot during the phase of my career. Because I have the ability to understand technology at a deeper level, but at the same time have also mastered the skill in terms of being able to, provide a high-level narrative and a story, and then leverage different facets of marketing in order to market the different parts of the portfolio. So it's been an interesting journey. Love what I do, and especially the last 1 year has been really awesome for our teams.
It's not necessarily a traditional career path. It's not often that I speak to CMOs that started necessarily in engineering. What was it that made it sort of so exciting for you to transition from the more technical side of the business into the storytelling? Like, what made you make that jump and that professional transition?
So I was born, raised, and grew up in India. And growing up in India, I was told that my career path is going to be threefold: either an engineer, a doctor, or a loser. So I had to figure out.
There's only three options.
And it was set for me. And I decided to pick engineering because I was pretty good at math. Loved what I did in my engineering roles. But even while I was an engineering manager, engineering leader, I always gravitated towards the voice of the customer. And during those times, this was 2 decades ago, I used to run these, what I at that time used to be called focus groups, where I would bring in customers in order to basically try the products out, give me direct feedback in terms of being able to build the engineering roadmap for requirements for the future state of the product. And I would be very, very passionate about being able to solve customer pain points. And so after both my girls were born, and my youngest got to be 5 years old, I decided I had to explore this passion. Because like I said, I was raised to be an engineer, was a pretty decent engineer, but I had to figure out what I was actually passionate about. And so that's when I decided to make a career jump from engineering. I had to end up taking a demotion, a 3-step demotion, because I was an engineering director. And it was not very easy to move from an engineering director into a marketing director. And so that was a choice I had to make in order to basically explore the marketing career. But I always believe that every opportunity comes with its own risk. But if you are passionate about what you do, it's worth taking that particular risk. And I can confidently tell you that I've never looked back.
I love that. It's so inspiring to, I think so many of our audience, but to, I imagine so many people, and of course your girls that you work with, this idea that, the way you start is not the only career track, that take a risk, find perhaps a home that you can explore different roles in, right? A company that you have that affiliation to, and then who knows what might be around the corner. But there is this common denominator that, we talked a little bit before, you've mentioned it here, which is that even in an engineering role, you are inspired the most by the voice of the customer.
Yep.
And now that feels very marketing centric. Tell us a little bit about how, from hosting product focus groups that influence product, how, is that still a connection between these two roles? How do you prioritize listening to the voice of the customer now?
The best way to market your portfolio is, again, through the voice of the customer, right? Like everything which you can actually get from your customers is worth its weight in gold. And so that needs to be there across everything, from your brand story to your demand generation programs and tactics, what you actually have, to your website, to the various different programs you actually run. From when you think about end-to-end marketing, the voice of the customer needs to be instilled across the story end-to-end. And so I've continued to keep that thread going, taking on one area of passion. And so if you look at one of the recent things which we actually did here within the Webex business, especially in the earlier part of this year, is first we basically embarked on a journey in order to basically rebrand Webex. Webex is an eponymous product, and it's been in the market for 25 years. And for the very first time, we decided that we have to basically rebrand Webex. And there were many reasons why we decided to basically go in the direction. One being the voice of the customer. I'll give you a little bit of color on that, but just sticking to this voice of the customer topic, one of the way we basically brought the brand to life is by building, various different large media brand to demand generation campaign, leveraging one of our Webex customers, which is actually McLaren. And we have now basically brought that particular brand to demand campaign in multiple different markets to life. And it really warms my heart at the amazing job the team actually did in terms of being able to tell the story of Webex so that we can win the hearts and minds of our customers and our future prospects.
And we're going to get to this campaign because in the moments that we had to speak beforehand, I got to nerd out on my passion for F1, and the connection is incredible. So, but before we get to that, because I feel like that's almost the end result, if you will, in a way. This is like the customer voice part of it. It's the here's the demonstration of our capabilities. But sort of before we get to that, it's almost sort of take a few steps back, because this is a huge moment in the history of Webex. Like you said, this is the biggest rebrand that you've ever gone through. It's happening at a moment where the responsibility, the expectation of brands, I think, has changed so very much. And perhaps if you were going through a rebrand 5 years ago, the context to that would have been so very different. The results were probably going to be very, very different. So let's talk a little bit about the sort of origins or the genesis of the approach that you took for this rebrand, and how you think Webex is has managed to be as relevant as it is in the moment perhaps we find ourselves at.
So, we embarked on the journey of rebranding Webex, I think, in fall of last year. So as we, thought through that, when you rebrand a product like Webex, it's not just about, the logo or the color palette or the various different other brand systems, right? Webex is a SaaS-based product. If you just take the video conferencing part of the SaaS-based product, and it would be just the video conferencing part it would probably be the 5th or 6th largest SaaS-based company in the world. And so the product is the brand. So when you think about a product like Webex, where, it's not just, that's why we came to the conclusion that we need to have a North Star. a North Star, which everybody needs to actually believe in. And so that's how we started to think. And the other thing is we also saw, remember, this was done in the heart of COVID when everybody was actually at home and the teams had to collaborate with each other. And like I said, since it's a SaaS-based product, the product is the actual brand. We had to come up with a purpose. I'm a big believer that brand with a purpose is extremely important, and even more important in this particular world, especially given what everybody's gone through over the last 2 years. And so as we thought about it, we realized that it's not just about marketing. It's about the product, it's about the marketing, and it's also about the cultural transformation, which is going to become very important because it's not about, the beautiful iconography or the color palette. It's about walking the walk and talking the talk. And when the marketing brand transformation comes together with the product transformation, with the underlying cultural transformation in the company, that's when the true magic happens. And so we had to basically align not just with my marketing team, but I also had to align with the engineering leadership team so that they all felt that this particular purpose is something which they will actually adhere to. And it is about also influencing the BU leadership in order to really think that way, right? So the goal for me and my team was to have every engineer wake up every day in the morning and think about what can they actually contribute from an engineering capacity, which aligns with the brand promise. And so our brand promise for Webex is to basically power an inclusive future for all. And you'll now see that with everything we actually do. So if you think about the new logo, which we brought to market and launched in summer of this year, it's a W. It's a superimposed W. And the logo actually represents two hands coming together like this, right? It's a harmonious flow of ideas. It's about that collaboration, that inclusive collaboration. Anybody can talk about collaboration, but it's about the inclusivity part, which is more important. And so when we talk about inclusivity, for us, diversity, accessibility is table stakes. Has to be included. There is no questions around that. But it's beyond diversity and it's beyond the accessibility element. It's about how do you basically take the 3 billion digital workers around the planet and bring them together where you break down the barriers across culture, across location, across geography, even across social economic level. That is what I mean when I say you have to think about building a brand with a purpose. So the logo, represents that harmonious flow of ideas. We have a new modern color palette, which is vibrant, which is energetic, but again, stays true to the promise of inclusivity. The iconography, the photography, all of the brand systems were actually completely rebranded in order to focus on this inclusive as a design principle. Having said that, we also played a big role in terms of partnering with our engineering counterparts to bring that into the product as well. And so examples of that is, as a part of the relaunch, we brought many, many features and innovations into the video conferencing part of the product. So now I could be talking in English and you can consume that in Polish. And so with Webex, you have the ability to translate from English into 100+ languages in real time. Why did we do that? Because we wanted to give an equal seat at the table so that we can break down the barriers across multiple different geography. Another example is we created a partnership with Ariana Huffington's company, Thrive Global, and they have an app which is called a Reset app. And what Ariana's team has actually done is during this, especially during this particular times, a lot of people are feeling tremendous amount of video fatigue, mental fatigue, and our personal life has blended with our work life. And so how do you care for employees? How do you care for people, their mental health? And so that Reset app is now integrated directly within Webex. I'm a workaholic myself, and it'll give me a notification and it'll say that, I have to take a break so that I don't go from one meeting to another meeting. And research has proven that a 5-minute break between meetings has a tremendous amount of impact in terms of your mental health. Small things like that actually matter, especially when you have to think about this new hybrid work. So proud to say that when the marketing promise comes together, when you have a brand with a promise with the product, along with the cultural transformation, which we now have here within Cisco, that is when whole magic comes together.
I really think it's so impressive because, like you said, it's this sort of critical combination of both, like the brand's promise, the brand's value, really clearly being like articulated, right? So and that is accessibility and equality for all. There's technology for good. Absolutely, being able to use the technology that you're building to unlock opportunities, to provide that equality through access. And that is a huge brand mission. But to then be able to actually connect it back to the product, to the innovations being made there, and then ultimately to the culture within the company. I think that sort of trifecta, as you will, is not something a lot of brands are able to, let's say, perhaps truly see through and act, certainly not in the speed of which you did it. So one of the things that sort of to me is quite remarkable here is that, again, 25 years sort of biggest brand moment. How did you pull this off in the middle of a pandemic?
So I would say that, it's the power of the team, right? So because ultimately you can come up with the best ideas on the planet, but if you don't have a team which can basically bring those creative ideas to life, can do anything across the board. For us, during the pandemic, Webex became a lot of, it's the way I actually tell the story is before the pandemic, the large corporations actually knew who is Webex. During the pandemic, even a 3-year-old child knows about a video conferencing tool.
Yeah, right.
Like air and water, you cannot actually survive without a video conferencing tool. And so for us, how do you basically change and bring that mindset internally within the company? And so we had to rally internally. My marketing team is an unbelievable team. And so everybody actually got together, everybody, adhered towards this particular brand promise. But the part which was amazing is how our entire engineering teams also basically rallied behind the brand with a purpose.
Yeah.
Like you rightfully called out, it is the perfect trifecta. If we had rebranded Webex with just the marketing, it would have had a little bit of impact because I think a lot of, especially the younger generation, the Gen Z, they like a brand with a purpose. They like to do that social good. It would have had a little bit of an impact. But when the product comes together with the cultural transformation, with the marketing promise, that's when the trifecta effect actually really happens, right? I call that the perfect storm. And I would say I'm privileged, lucky to have a team which basically embraced that wholly, and a company like Cisco, which basically, partnered in terms of being able to bring everything together.
Maybe it was a sort of the right moment, but clearly that teamwork drove this commitment and the passion around the project. And you mentioned about sort of a Gen Z audience as well. When you think about, or when I think about sort of, traditional big B2B rebrandings, especially for like SaaS technology, I'm not necessarily thinking about how is this going to appeal perhaps to a Gen Z audience first. But they are certainly much better, I think, as a cohort at sort of distilling through the like fluffy brand promise to the actual brand promise. How important is this audience to you? How do you think about them differently? And I mention that again because you reference them on more than one occasion, sort of as this like next generation of customers, next generation of employees. Like, why are Gen Z so important to you?
I would say, Gen Z is going to be the future workforce. They are going to be the future employees, I would say. But having said that, right, like because we all went through something like the pandemic and, collaboration technologies became like bread and water. And I would think that is to have a sustained relevance in this new generation world, which we call the hybrid work world, Gen Z is going to become even more important. And if you have read, I've read a lot of research around the Gen Z about their care about, and one of the important elements, especially with the Gen Z, is about having that North Star. I am a mother of 2 Gen Z girls myself. One of them is actually in the workforce today. And I see in terms of, what she cares about, and a big part of that is the social good. Is the big part of that is having that North Star, having a brand with a purpose which they can actually align on. But they're also very picky about being authentic about it, right? So you can't just have a brand with a purpose and talk about inclusivity and it is not represented in your product, in your cultural transformation. That really doesn't land with them. And I think the world is experiencing a very interesting phenomena. For the first time, I think in 2 decades, we actually have a quad generational workforce. The baby boomers have actually not really retired, and they're still within the workforce. You have the baby boomers, you have the Gen X, you have the Gen Y or the millennial population, and you have the Gen Z. Everybody's got different likings, care-abouts, dislikes, pet peeves, whatever. And so how do you make sure that you land with all of the population? And that is a hard one to do, but I believe that having the right brand, the right promise, and delivering against that particular brand promise will adhere to all of the population, and specifically more towards the Gen Z population.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to that like connectivity between like the brand story. And again, in this case, that inclusivity and equality is a core message. And then ultimately the execution of it. However, the reality of it is that your Gen Z audience probably aren't consuming all of their content on the platforms perhaps that you are, or the team is sort of the most familiar when creating content for, or these sort of stories lend themselves to better. Now I think they're probably going to find themselves in TikTok and in the different social platforms. How do you adapt your brand story, which is so clear and so connected to the rest of the business, but to platforms that perhaps are not as, again, like they're evolving, but they're not the first places that you'd think of communicating perhaps this sort of message? How are you using platforms like TikTok?
Oh, totally. So one of the key things we have also learned is if you want to get to the right audience, the right platform absolutely matters, right? Like with our IT decision makers, IT practitioners, the traditional marketing platforms are definitely being leveraged, whether it is a large events, virtual events, small events, or whether it is through taking them through a digital journey, catering towards the right audience and the personas you're actually targeting. All of that marketing mix is still in play. But especially when you think about the newer, the younger, the Gen Z population, I'm a big believer that there are 2 important elements. One is the right platform. And so, for example, we never used to have a big relevance on Instagram or on TikTok, and now we do. And that is one of the key ways you basically get to the Gen Z population. Outside that, I'm a big believer that there is a new trend, which is basically rising in the market. Previously, I myself used to think that this particular trend, this is the rise of social influencers, is primarily going to cater only towards the B2C company.
Yeah.
Right. But it is not just B2C. And I've learned a lot of lessons along the way with my own 2 daughters. My oldest is an engineer at Twilio. She calls herself as an engineer by the day and a social influencer by the night. And my
the new superheroes.
Exactly. And when they used to, my youngest is similar. She's 3rd year in Cal Poly in engineering discipline, and same, has embraced a social influencing career. And one
I'm really loving this: engineer by day, social influencer by night. Like
that's exactly right. And it's so funny to see that. And as I watched them, I realized that finding the right social influencer, it's exactly the same marketing discipline. So when you're actually targeting your IT CIO persona, which is most of the time where marketing is actually focused on, you basically build an experience and you leverage the right platforms in order to land your messages with that particular target audience. It is the same thing with social influencing. I can't just go after any social influencer because they have a large followership. I have to find the right authentic social influencer who can become an advocate for my platform. Authenticity, transparency is extremely important, because initially when I went down that particular direction, I think in earlier part of last year, we just hired a social influencer. We got called out that it was not very authentic. We learned a lot of lessons out of that. And so it's not about the followership. It's about finding the right target audience for a social influencer who can be authentic. And so we have changed our tactics. And one of the predominant areas where we have seen tremendous amount of positive attribution, I'll talk about the ROI as well, is YouTube technology influencers. There are a bunch of YouTube technology influencers who focus on video conferencing as a category, or they basically focus on calling as a category. And so we reach out to those social influencers. We give them a demo, we give them our product, we ask them to use the product, and then do the right thing in terms of being able to come up with an asset, which could be a short YouTube video, but we ask them to be authentic about it. Because if they are not authentic about it, it impacts their brand and it impacts our brand. So authenticity becomes very critical.
Yeah, you mentioned transparency. Actually, I think that's super interesting. I think one of the reasons why influencer marketing is so successful is that it's sort of, and I think Edelman talks about this in one of their recent reports, but it's sort of that trust factor, right? Because you have so much trust with this individual ultimately, and so if you can't maintain that trust, and a critical part of that is that transparency, is the clarity on like, how is this relationship formed, what is being sort of paid for, etc. Do you think, this is maybe sort of more of an industry question, do you think there's a long way to go in terms of industry standards and regulations around this? Or do you think, is the market at a relatively good point already?
No, this in my mind is growing quite a bit. If I was looking up the statistics to understand, how big of an industry this is, and there was an Edelman report, which I recently read, which said that in 2020, I think the influencer industry was about 4.6 billion, and I think they predicted that by 2022 it'll be more than 10 billion.
I think that's right. What's also fascinating about that is that it's in this report that clearly we've both read, which was that said that the market size in China is 110 billion. So you can see double year sort of growth, double growth year over year here, but the potential clearly is absolutely enormous. So with growth in a marketing area like this should come regulation, correct? And
100%. Yeah. And so there should be regulation, and I would say regulations in multiple different areas. One is about, and I see this again, going based upon example with both my girls, how do influencers get paid? And how do you make sure that there are three important elements, like I said, I started to talk about. One is going to be about the transparency. How do you make sure that social influencers are transparent? Meaning that if they're basically producing an asset for a particular company, they need to have sponsored by in their bylines and in their hashtag. Otherwise, it's really not viewed as transparent. And so transparency with respect to delivering against that particular brand promise is important. The second one is the authenticity, right? So they are only effective and compelling as the trust they receive from their audience, which actually support them. So it's not just about getting celebrity endorsements. And this is where I said that we tried that in early part of last year, and we saw the response we got, and that told us a lot. So authenticity becomes really, really important, and that is why, as for marketeers who are looking at social influencing as an important area, they need to find the right social influencer who will be the right advocates in order to represent their brand in an authentic way. And the third one is about sophistication.
Yeah.
So as I look at the social influencers, both my girls, you have to have relevance in your art, right? Like, how do you basically build that fan following for yourself?
You have to have
One
the
is,
credibility, right? That's it. You can't
and
just, yeah. Otherwise, again, I think your audience and your constituents are sort of going to see straight through that. So yeah, that credibility, authenticity, transparency, actually, really all of the things that we apply to any type of content marketing at
exactly right.
all should
That's
and will apply to social to influencer
100%.
marketing.
That's
So
exactly
this
right.
is clearly a trend that we'll continue to watch. We talk about people that represent your brand. I think this is a perfect moment to pivot to the McLaren story. So I said I'm a huge F1 fan. I became completely obsessed with the sport, as millions of others did. In fact, through the Netflix documentary, there's an amazing Amanda Mull article on the Atlantic that you should read about this obsession with F1. But you partnered with the McLaren team to create this incredible, I mean, it's a case study in essence, but like it feels so much more sophisticated than that, and I think so much more relevant than that. And tell us a little bit about how you identified McLaren as a potential partner, and then how you brought this story to fruition. And again, in the context of the pandemic, because I've seen the commercial. We can share it with everyone after some follow up as well. It's a sophisticated piece of filming. Tell us a little bit about this partnership.
Yeah, so in early part, I think in fall of last year, the team created a dedicated sponsorship. It started as a sponsorship with McLaren. But when it comes to sponsorship, the team and we have a promise, which we basically follow through. One is we don't create sponsorships just because it's pay for play. That word is actually gone. In our mind, you have to also find the right vendor in order to create sponsorships, and you need to align with them in terms of your values. And number two, an additional thing which we actually deliver against is that vendor also needs to be a customer of ours.
Right.
Because, and so when we started the conversations with Zach Brown is the CEO of McLaren, and where it and we first, reached out to them because we aligned in terms of our value system with respect to Webex. When you think about Webex at that particular time, this was last year, the biggest elements were the performance, the speed. When you think about Formula One racing, it's about making the decision in a split second. It's about delivering against security, being able to deliver against scale, reliability, and performance is really important. And that was a core differentiation when you think about Webex. And so that's how the partnership actually started. Since then, it's evolved from just a sponsorship where McLaren is now a full-fledged Webex customer.
Wow.
And they used to be a customer for another a product in the industry, and in the middle of the race season, they became a Webex customer. And so as we saw how McLaren is building their race cars of the future, and how they're engaging with their fans, and how they're engaging with their engineering teams in order to bring new innovations to market, and especially all of this was done during this hybrid world, we decided that we would partner together and build a brand story which will bring the likes of both McLaren around their speed, their performance, and how they're actually engaging with their fans, both externally as well as their employees internally. And we would tell that story. Like I said, a big thing which I've always believed in is the art of storytelling. How can you basically bring the art of storytelling with the promise of your customer? And so that's how this global brand to demand campaign was born. We launched it in June of this year, and it was activated across multiple different markets. And this is a story where we actually have built out a global media strategy, which includes broadcast, connected TV, digital, social, podcast, you name it. It was a global media strategy. And so really proud of the work which my team actually did. Like you said, this was actually shot live, and during the most stringent times, especially in and we could not shoot this video
Yeah.
digitally, and so we had to hire a small crew. We had to think about all of the COVID governances which were in place, and at the same time we were able to tell that really powerful story.
Clearly great teamwork is behind all of that as well. But and one of the things that appealed to me most in the film that you showed me is that WebEx is enabling connectivity between teams, between the drivers, between the fans as well. And it sort of struck me that like in this, like again, this short film, you see this like interchangeability as the platform from being about professional use to being about kind of end consumer use as well. And I've talked a little bit about how the services, the technology that WebEx offers right now is a little bit like the foundational parts of our society. And so this isn't exclusively about how businesses are going to transform anymore. It's about actually how we all transform and learn to live in this slightly more hybrid world. That like switch from B2B to B2C, switch to B2B, like how, just give me your thoughts on that from a marketer. I actually think we're going to run out of time, and I have one final question, but have you had to change your approach and your thinking because now ultimately the technologies you offer are not defined by a particular like audience set, but are applicable to everyone?
You still have to be able to tell, because we are in a unique position, I would say, is because if you look at our WebEx technology, which is a large product line, and video conferencing being one of the products within the product line, we sell to B2B, meaning that we sell to IT and we sell to facilities with our devices, but we still have to build mind share and win the hearts of the underlying end users. End users are people like you and me. And so that's an area where, where marketing can play a big role, right? So as our engineering teams are bringing these amazing, inclusive, collaborative features to market, how do you basically package that up and then bring that into the art of storytelling? If you look at the McLaren ad, we looked at 3 different use cases. Again, inclusivity, like I said, is very key for us. So one of the areas is, with one of our devices, it's like a secret sauce. I could be in a coffee shop and I could continue to have a call, and none of the audiences in the meeting will even hear a split second of the background noise which is happening, because we have this patented AI technology which is called background noise removal. And McLaren actually uses that, because when you are engaging with your fans live, it tends to be extremely noisy. And if you turn on your background noise removal, nobody would hear any one of the background noise happening across the board, right? And so leveraging the power of our technology, where we have brought these new innovations to market and showing how our customers are leveraging our technology, is the art of storytelling. And so that's what we did with the McLaren ad. We showcased background noise removal. We also showcased fan engagement with Slido. Slido was a recent acquisition we made for polling, and all the fans around the world, basically, in the virtual world, engage with the McLaren race car drivers. And so that is the part where you actually start to see the magic happen, where you can actually bring more of the consumer elements into any one of your brand spots.
And it makes it so much more relatable. And again, like back to this idea of being sort of accessible. Thank you so much for sharing so much with us about this incredible year, about, yes, the new brand, but so much more of what it actually means and stands for, and how it actually delivers its promise within the products and within the culture of WebEx. It's truly inspiring. And that was going to be my last question for you. So where do you find your inspiration, and where are you perhaps looking, when you're looking forward, what are you going to spend your time doing so that you have the next boost of inspiration? Tell us just a little bit about that.
So my inspiration has always been my mother. My mother has been my alma mater, and been a big source of inspiration for me in my life. Very earlier on, I learned 3 important principles from her, which I've taken it through my entire life journey, both personal as well as professional, and hopefully have shared that with both my girls. One is her philosophy was alive at 25, because people do stupid things. And the mortality rate actually drops tremendously after you're 25 years old. And it's in a steady stream. So alive at 25, being independent is important. And the last but not the least is making a contribution to the society. How do you give back to the society? And so these are the underlying principles I've adopted throughout my entire professional as well as personal career. Having said that, that is where she's the person I actually drive my inspiration from. But having said that, I have a philosophy where, if you're passionate about what you do, it takes away, from a mentality where you're actually doing your job. And so the way I look at life is I wake up in the morning every day, go to my job because I'm having fun. And that is the most important element. And many a times we get stuck in careers where we are not passionate about it. And it's on us to find the right career, which you're actually passionate about, which takes away, the boredom or the anxiety or, whatever you might actually be feeling. And that is when not that I did not like my engineering career, but I don't think I would have been as passionate like I am right now with my current career.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really, I think you saw me writing sort of furious notes at this point. Like I'm like, this is inspiration I'm going to share back with my team, with my children. It's so powerful to hear you talk about the things that truly matter. And it's interesting. We have a writer called, he writes for us, but he's also one of the top professors at Harvard, Arthur Brooks. He has this column, How to Build a Happy Life. And when he talks about work, he doesn't just talk about it in like career success and titles and progression as being the way to find satisfaction or to be happy at work. He talks about work in the way that it allows you to play a contribution, whether it's to society, to industry, to your team, to community. And I think what you've done today so beautifully is also taught us about a brand in transformation, this amazing, important moment, but also talked about how the satisfaction comes from being part of a business that's giving back more, and that being able to provide value in terms of contribution and that meaningful work.
Yes,
clearly means so very much. Thank you so much for sharing all of this for us. We could talk for another 45 minutes, but we are definitely getting kicked off. So Aruna, thank you for joining me, and Brand Innovators, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.